disadvantages, and categories of applications that it applies to. But let me just, again, quickly recap the points I was arguing for in the keynote address that I gave yesterday. And so I argued that there's 3 general approaches that you might use for Ajax applications. Approach number 1, you've got an application that's already running. You wrote it in .NET, you wrote it in PHP, you wrote it in Ruby on Rails, you wrote it in JSF or Struts or serverless in JSP, and you want to gradually add in some Ajax, some richer GUI controls or some Ajax-enabled features. And in that case, I think that grabbing EXTJS or Dojo or jQuery or Scriptaculous or YUI is a good approach. Category number 3 was this last lecture, which is you're starting a new project, and you want it to look like a desktop application. And probably you have complicated client-server communication. GWT is a good approach. But the middle category is also a very large category. The middle category is, I'm starting a new project, so I'm willing to use a technology that my project is not already using. I'm willing to start with something new because it's a new project. But I don't really want it to look like a desktop application. It's a mixture. It's a hybrid. I have some traditional web flow, just like the Google homepage. The Google homepage is a mixture. When I type into it, it uses Ajax. When I press submit, it's a normal web flow. It goes to a new page. Hotels.com is the same sort of example, so is Travelocity, all of which run Java. And even Gmail, which it mostly looks like a desktop application. There are a few places where you actually leave and go to another page. Then, a tool that has integrated Ajax support is a good choice. Because if you have integrated Ajax support, you have 2 big advantages. Advantage number 1, and I'm just all recapping from the keynote yesterday. Advantage number 1 is that you don't have to write explicit JavaScript. So if you use ASP.NET Ajax, if you use JSF 2.0, if you use Struts 2.0, if you use SpringMVC version 3, you're not writing this JavaScript. You're using tags that they've given you that use JavaScript behind the scenes, but you're not explicitly writing it. And advantage number 2 is when you make your Ajax requests, it knows about all of your server-side entities and components and names. And so in JSF, it knows about the name of your managed beans. Okay, and so I want to talk about why we want Ajax integrated with JSF 2 instead of trying to add it on using jQuery or EXTJS or Dojo or GWT or something like that. Okay, so we already talked in the last lecture about why we want web apps, why we want Ajax. But then, what about JSF? And JSF is designed around MVC. And so it's designed around separating the code that creates data from the code that presents data. And JSF just has a lot of stuff built in that we all need to do. It's got stuff built in for form field validation. It's got stuff built in for page navigation. It's got stuff built in for templating. The templating mechanism in JSF called Faceless is very, very nice. So you can say, well, most of my pages have a header at the top, a footer at the bottom, and a navigation bar on the left side, and then some content in the middle. And so you can start with that template, and then you can make sub-templates, and you can replace a piece of templates, kind of like tiles. Anybody knows tiles from Struts? Kind of like tiles, except a lot better, because they learned a lot of lessons from tiles. In fact, David Geary, the guy who originally was one of the main authors of tiles, was part of the team who did this with Facelets. And then there's just a ton of component libraries in JSF. JSF is very standard, so you can go to Oracle and download their free ADF component library for JSF and drop it in. Or you can go to JBoss and get rich faces. And if you get JBoss rich faces, you don't have to run on JBoss. It comes from JBoss, but it runs fine on Tomcat or any other server that you've got JSF installed on. It runs fine on WebLogic or Glassfish or WebSphere or Jetty or Tomcat. Or you can get ice faces, or you can get Web Galileo, and there's a whole range, some of which you pay for and some of which are free, component libraries with all sorts of rich, charts and graphs and tables and trees and sliders and so on for JSF. And it's officially part of Java E. It's part of the standard. When you get Java E, you get JSF. That's the good news. But the bad news, in my opinion, and this is very much a personal opinion, not everybody agrees with it, is JSF 1 was cumbersome. A lot of clients hire me to come and teach them JSF courses, and I tried to kind of seal my lips a little bit about my true feelings of JSF. I just didn't really like it very well. It had a good component model, it had all these third-party libraries, it had good support in Eclipse, but it just was kind of tedious to use. JSF 2.0 is dramatically better in every way. It's more powerful and, at the same time, a lot simpler. It learned a lot of the lessons of Ruby on Rails, and JBoss Scene and Ajax for JSF had major influences on the development of JSF version 2. So JSF version 2 has many things that are better, much easier to make composite components, a lot less mucking around with this config file if you don't want to and don't need to. A lot of kind of smart defaults from Ruby on Rails. But the part and many of those features are on the website. If you want to look at my tutorials, I've got 15 different tutorials on JSF. But what I want to concentrate on this lecture is what JSF 2 added that JSF 1 didn't have for integrated JSF support, Ajax support. Okay, and I think that in that middle category, you're starting a new project, and it's a hybrid project, some page navigation, some Ajax support. It's very important and it's very beneficial to have something that's integrated in your web framework. Use ASP.NET Ajax, use JSF 2, use Struts 2, use SpringMVC 3. Don't use jQuery or ext.js because your Ajax tools, if you use an integrated library, know about your components. In jQuery, it doesn't know what a JSF component is. It doesn't know what a Struts component is. It doesn't know what an ASP component is. It just knows what HTML DOM elements are. But the components that you get in ASP or in JSF or in Struts correspond to some sort of complex DOM element. And so your jQuery or ext.js doesn't know about those. And secondly, it doesn't know about your server-side stuff. When you use ext.js, when you use DWR, when you use jQuery, when you use prototype, the server is just a URL. And you pass it request parameters. And you get a piece of data back. So you can't say what JSF or Struts people say, oh, well, I have an object on the server named customer. And when I talk to the customer object, it should automatically know about all this auxiliary information from the text fields having to do with the first name and the last name or the customer ID of this customer. Well, that's not the way jQuery or Prototype or Scriptaculars work. They don't know about the names of your server-side logic. So when you add in Ajax to Struts or ASP or JSF, you've got two separate pieces. You've got your normal web application flow that does it the JSF or the Struts way, and then you've got your Ajax requests that have an entirely separate mechanism. That's not such a good thing. So you'd like an integrated library where your Ajax calls are integrated with the rest of your application, knows about your components. Okay, so in this example here, we're looking at the middle category. So in the third lecture today, I'm going to look at the first category. In the first lecture today, I looked at the third category. And in this lecture today, I'm looking at the middle category. So again, I'm not arguing that JSF 2 is the answer. Just like in the last lecture, I wasn't arguing that GWT was the answer. I don't believe that there is an answer. I think that different applications fit different Ajax technologies in different ways, and that the right choice depends a lot on your application and what you're doing. So please, I'm not a GWT evangelist. I'm not a JSF 2 evangelist. I'm not a jQuery evangelist. I'm not out there to tell you this is what everybody should be using, and those who aren't using it are, ignorant fools or under the thumb of, whoever. No, I think that there's a lot of different technology, and it depends on your